can I see the future? Yeah, sure. Wow, how is that possible that the same patterns are encoded, at all levels of scale?
At the micro and the macro.
Exactly. Yeah. It's all like algorithms. And so I sometimes call gene keys the algorithms of incarnation. What it's showing you is a journey. Here's your specific journey. You came in on this specific trajectory and angle. True memory goes forwards as well as backwards in time. It's not, there is no forwards and backwards. Actually, there's an omniscient memory where at the highest level we see everything. In a way, what you're seeing is this spirit working its way down into the form through these theatrical lives that we're living out. It's a bit risky to say, but we have this illusion of choice because we have this illusion of being a chooser.
What did the awakened state for you feel like? What was the texture?
It was light, it was pure light streaming through me in every direction. The light had intelligence in it, so it's very difficult to explain that. Anything I wanted to know, I could know. I stood inside that future human and I saw where we were going. I didn't just see it, I felt it, I knew it. I was like, oh, thank God.
I hope we get to have another conversation because I'm going to be loaded with the specifics of things that I've explored on this path.
Right.
In my inner circle of friends and community, there are very few people like Richard Rudd who have impacted lives on the scale that he has. He's the author and founder of a system called Gene Keys that maps out a blueprint, not only for your own specific life, but for actually the evolution of humans as a species. So it's your own specific key based on your time of birth and place, but also keys that you can drop in and understand the unique challenges and unique gifts and unique possibilities of where you can go and where collectively we can go together. This podcast was absolutely fascinating, and I can't wait to introduce Richard Rudd. Richard, so great to have you. I have to say that I have a lot of amazing podcast guests, but when I got the word out that I was going to podcast with you, people freaked out. Your work has impacted people in a particularly powerful way. Why do you think that is?
Such a good first question. I would say because it comes from the heart, primarily, and it's authentic and honest. And like one of the first things I often would say to people is the teaching itself is a bit of a trick. It's a trick, but underneath the teaching and between the words lies a transmission, a transmission of truth and wisdom. And it's in those gaps and the betweens where the magic lies. And it's a caution to people not to get overly attached to the teachings themselves, which are large and wide and impressive in a way. But underneath it is this energy, this essence that is rooted in a deep resonance with a universal truth. I think that's probably why people relate.
When you mention a trick in the teachings, I think one of the things that we were talking about before we jumped on air was that as part of the Gene Keys, you can go in, you can put in your birthday and your place of birth and time of birth, and you can get this kind of, okay, and for me, I'm, path 37, Gene Key 37. And in a way, what you were expressing is that's a little bit of a tricky way in because it gives people the gratification of, oh, this is me. But actually, there's a universal wisdom of different archetypes, which we all share collectively.
Yeah.
And so in a way, it's like this is kind of the candy that gets you in the front door. But if you actually sit down, take some time and some presence, you'll find that actually it's a feast.
Yeah.
It's a whole buffet.
Yeah.
If you actually have the patience.
Absolutely. And I tease people sometimes. I say, what if you had a completely different birth time and it was wrong, and you would have just as profound an experience because you're submerged. It depends on how deeply you commit, but you're submerging yourself in universal archetypes. As you said, it's a feast of wisdom. And the wisdom is inside us in the first place. It's not in the teachings. It's not that. That's not what it's about. It's inside us. So the only purpose of any spiritual teaching really is to unlock that wisdom that's already in the body.
Yeah.
And so Gene Keys provides a lot of food. As you said, it's like a big smorgasbord of food from different traditions wound and woven together in sort of mysterious and poetic ways that you can explore. And the trick is that to try and get people to stay long enough in the field of the teaching, of the wisdom, so that an epiphany happens inside them. In the first moment someone has one of those experiences, and that's what you hear sometimes out there, people going, wow, your work has changed me. What they're really saying is that I had an epiphany from inside my being because I was contemplating universal truths.
Which is how it works with any sacred text.
Yeah, exactly.
This could be an esoteric ancient text, or now this is kind of a new modern esoteric mystical text that you've actually put into culture with roots that go into kind of ancient wisdom traditions.
Yeah, very much. And also with a lot of resonance to modern science and quantum theory and biology.
I was just listening to you explain my particular key, and you're talking a lot about Carl Jung's work, the anima, the animus, and I want to get into that. But first, before we get into that, I want to just explore this thread. One of the resistances I've had for any of these natal chart, kind of, there's a whole field with astrology and a variety of different things. Well, my mother went into labor and was pushing and trying to get me out at, like 9 p.m. on the night of the February 27th. The doctor was asleep. And so they had some overnight nurse person who was like, keep pushing. So my mom's pushing. And then for 9 hours. And then the doctor gets in, wakes up at 6 a.m. and like, holy shit, Kathy's still in labor? And he's like, oh, fuck, all right, I'm going to get to the hospital, out in Santa Monica. And he gets in there and he takes a look and he's like, oh, the bones haven't opened enough. The head's stuck. There's no way Aubrey's going to come out.
Yeah.
So we got a, C-section.
Yeah. And
then so I'm born at 6:34 a.m.
Yeah.
And I think to myself, come on, y'all. Like, you're going to say that actually, it seemed like the universe intended for me to come out the night before, but because the doctor was asleep, now my whole life is going to be on a different path based upon the doctor falling asleep. I'm like, get the fuck out of here. Yeah. And so I've always had this big resistance to this idea that, because I do understand this as above, so below, we're in this kind of synchronistic way, but there's so many things that can happen that can shift things. So I've had a lot of resistance to it. But then still, I've gotten a little deeper into astrology and with Deborah Silverman start to see the deeper cuts, which is actually tapping into more universal wisdom, but started to find some unique resonance where I'm like, damn, hard for me to deny that. Same with this, Gene Key 37. I'm like, damn, I can read a lot of different gene keys, but there's something particularly important about this one and resonant about this one for me. How does this all work? Why does it work? What is the universal meta phenomenon that we're guided by the time that we take our first breath?
Well, can I start by taking you into some work that I know you've done a lot of, right? Which is working with ayahuasca.
Yes.
And right. So when you're in that, I haven't taken ayahuasca, but I know the state. And when you're in that deep state, and you're looking out at the fractal universe and you're experiencing it live, you will recognize, I'm sure, the feeling of the perfection of all things, and that knowing of the perfection of the unraveling.
Well, I see largely the imperfections of myself, but yes.
But even through the imperfections, that's the point, right? So you get to see the precision of the algorithms of consciousness kind of playing out their theater, right? So that state is, that informs like how you were born, for example. So the perfection of the doctor falling asleep and the humor of that as well is part of it, right? And all of that, and then the timing of when you came out and the correspondence of that moment with, kind of the as above, all the heavenly bodies lined up in certain order and area, that.
Right.
That notion of fractal time, it's like, if you look at fractals and the notion of the universe as being a fractal universe that we live in, we know this from science. Like, you can look at these different. You can cut a grapefruit in half, and there in there are patternings that reflect the swirling of nebula. And you're like, wow, how is that possible that the same patterns are encoded? At all levels of scale,
at the micro and the macro.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So if you know it's there in space, it must be there in time. And it takes an extra little leap of the brain, of the mind, to go, well, okay, if there's such a thing as fractal time, that means that every moment, like this moment right now, has a correspondence in the fractal universe to a whole set of archetypes and experiences. And there's a perfection to that. It's all like algorithms. And so I sometimes call gene keys the algorithms of incarnation, because they're showing us specific patterns. And gene keys is based not in this traditional astrology. It's based on a system that came from human design, a thing called human design, which lays out a 64-fold structure. Now, I know you also know Nassim Haramein, and you're a fan of his. Well, one of his insights has been that the time-space continuum is based on a 64-fold tetrahedral structure, the matrix. So what you're looking at with gene keys is you're looking at the fractal universe mapped out through this same structure, which then has correspondence to the 64 codons in our DNA. And the mathematics that kind of helps us understand all of that is so precise. So when you look at the I Ching, which is also a deep part of the gene keys, is what it's based on, but not the traditional I Ching. And I should say that. It's like not the traditional interpretations, just the formula, And it's a complete new reworking of the formula through my poetic insight and revelations.
Yeah.
So, but when you look at all that, you're looking at this incredible grid of universal patterns. And so you can look at harmonics and timings and, of the fractal of your being, and it doesn't touch your soul, right? Because the soul is something beyond timings.
In Kairos.
Exactly.
Yeah, in the timeless
So what
time.
it does is it's only showing you a patterning, a coding of, it's not even showing you who you are in one level, because that's your soul, that's beyond. But what it's showing you is a journey. Here's your specific journey. You came in on this specific trajectory and angle, and it's encoding a journey, an archetypal journey. And you can read some of the algorithms of that journey in the gene keys, and you can contemplate them. And contemplation's key, because as you contemplate them, they go deeper inside you, and then you have your own unique relationship to the wisdom.
Yeah.
Yeah. So does that help?
Makes, so what it's evoking in me is this understanding that if God is seeking ever greater complexity, transformation, evolution through us, as us, and beyond us, and there's a pattern of like, all right, we're going to work all of these archetypes, and these beings are going to come in, and they're going to work through these different archetypes, and ultimately realize the ultimate transformation, which is the realization of our Christos, of our monad, of our divine nature, which transcends all. Behold, I make all things new. You've kind of transcended the patterns, but that's available to all of us. But we have to work through our own specific patterns, and there's a whole kind of clock, a whole mathematics and system by which all of these souls are incarnating, seeking their own, perfection in that messy way that we humans actually do it. And what's interesting though about that is, if you really believe this, it can lead to a greater sense of faith, because I think that's a challenge that we have right now. Because we look around the world, existential risk, the meta crisis, we're like, fuck, we're pretty fucked, you know. But if you think, well, Aubrey was supposed to be born at 6:34, and that required the doctor to fall asleep.
Yeah.
And yes, there's free will, and he could have, but in the unconscious, the unconscious and subconscious layers, there's something working that said, just go to sleep, doc.
Yeah.
Like, go to sleep, doc. This soul is it's not quite ready to come out at this point, and so then you can start to think, maybe there is some guiding principle, even though we have free will and even though we can fuck it up, because I've experienced like, man, I could have made a better choice. But then could I have? Like, maybe I needed to make that choice because I needed to learn that lesson still. So it's this delicate balance of the power of our choices and also an understanding that there's a divine timing and a way that things are moving underneath the surface.
Yeah, well, you're a student of the Kabbalah, right? So the Kabbalah teaches in its ancient roots this doctrine of emanationism, that the emanations, and it's a theory in a way of involution as opposed to a theory of evolution. So you can look at those two, and in Gene Keys, they're very much kind of part of the wisdom transmission. There's these two ways of looking from evolution, which is where we look from generally because that's where we feel we have free will, because we're evolving, right? So we have that choice points, decision points. But from the point of view of involution, which requires a heightened state of consciousness, and I can speak from my own personal experience of being in that state, the source of where Gene Keys came from. I was in this state for the first time for 3 days and 3 nights. And in that state where everything's perfect and you can, our memory, true memory, goes forwards as well as backwards in time. It's not, there is no forwards and backwards. Actually, there's an omniscient memory where at the highest level we see everything, and it's already happened. So all our lives, all our journeys, all of that has already occurred at the highest level of consciousness. So in a way, what you're seeing is this spirit working its way down into the form through these theatrical lives that we're living out. And we're all also one being at the highest level that's then differentiating into all these forms and remembering itself in epiphanies and eventually deconstructing the entire theater. And that's when we come into that kind of core, deepest truth inside ourselves, where we have that vast epiphany or the awakened epiphany of, oh my God, okay, both are true. I have free will, but also I don't have free will. That's the involution. Both are true.
It's a paradox, not a contradiction.
Paradox. So truth for me is always lying in paradox, but it's like it takes a higher state of because when you start to merge with the divine will, that's where you realize there is no you, there is no to choose. There is no you making any decisions. There's only the will of the whole making its decisions, like the doctor falling asleep, and it's making multiple decisions spontaneously in the flow of perfection. And that's what's giving rise to our experience. But then we're dropped down into these forms in a way, and the evolutionary part of us is the last one to kind of see what's actually going on. So we have this, it's a bit risky to say, but we have this illusion of choice because we have this illusion of being a chooser. So at the highest level, there is no choice. There's just the perfection of the pattern unfolding as it emanates down through time and space and through our history. And you talk about the meta crisis. That's a huge, beautiful choke point that we're at, in which a vast quantum leap is being called.
Yeah, and I guess the place for me where I actually open a little more, Dan Dennett wrote a book about free will called Elbow Room, right?
Yeah.
Like where there's a little more elbow room freed up. And in my study with Rebbe Gafni and the Kabbalah and his reading of Luria and Leiner and through this kind of what he calls radical Kabbalah, it's not only that the divine is the transcendence, it's also that we are the immanence of that transcendence. And so the divine is in us, as us, and through us. So the choice actually of the divine is actually moving through us also. So we do have some choice as the divine. right? So there's choice, and you may not be able to poke a stick at it. Like if you're a materialist, reductionist scientist, say, where is that happening in the brain? It's all antecedent causality.
Yeah.
No, maybe it's not in the brain. It's in the capital M mind of God that you're participating in, or not participating in some unconscious pattern. So it's an interesting, thing to explore, but it is, you have to be willing to hold the paradox, which is then, and one of the teachings is the only way to hold paradox is with laughter. Be like, fuck.
That's it. Absolutely. That's it. Yeah. Whenever I've got down to the core of being inside myself and deep mystical experiences, that is always where I've arrived at. Laughter. Yeah. That's what I hear. I hear the laughter of the cosmos.
I asked, I was recently spending time with Rebbe Gafni and Paul Selig, who's a channel, and Paul Selig channels this group of beings called the Guides, who have slightly differentiated personalities, but they're mostly a unified voice.
Right.
And I asked them one time, I said, do you guys ever laugh? And they responded, guys, do you guides ever laugh? And they responded, if we wanted, we'd be laughing all the time.
Yeah.
Like there's a great humor to hold the paradox of all of this, our spiritual incarnation and our physical, carnal existence.
It is. It's hilarious. Laughter is the only true response when you get to the core of the mystery.
Yeah, laughter, and then there's also the love and compassion and pain.
Of course.
There's truth if you get down to the core essence of it, you can feel it all. Mm-hmm. You could explode. And I don't know if you've had these experiences, and I want to go into your own mystical experience that almost felt like a channeling experience from just the brief bit that you talked about those 3 days. But if you get into these mystical states, you can find yourself in any one of these categories. I've been in a mystical state where all I could do was weep for the pain, the outrageous pain, and then mystical states where all I could do is love and be in awe of the wonder of the cosmos, and then all I could do is laugh. And at the whole thing, there's so many different ways in which we can view reality.
Absolutely, yeah. Laughter is. It doesn't even have to come as laughter. It's almost the place where that detachment occurs in us, where we realize the perfection of everything, and then we're free to weep or laugh, or But underneath it all is this kind of spontaneous surrender into the theater itself. I think that's what I've tried to encapsulate in my work anyway.
This podcast is brought to you by Chakaruna Books. Chakaruna is the Quechua word for bridge or bridge person, which is someone who can bring the wisdom, truth, beauty, art, and love and translate it to something that you can digest, enjoy, and be inspired by. The first 2 books are Love to the Seventh Power and Ridiculous Masterpiece, the poetry collections from myself and Caitlin Howell, along with these beautiful golden bookmark collector's notes from Metalmark. So you can check it all out at chakaruna.com, chakaruna.com. Okay, so take us through these 3 days. What happened? What were you doing before it kicked off? What happened when you entered the state? Tell us about this.
I mean, I would call it an acausal event. So it wasn't caused by anything I was doing. Certainly I wasn't taking anything. The only thing that I could say is that I had been contemplating the Kabbalah for about 2 years, and I was following my own way with it, completely spontaneous in my own route, and I was deep inside it, but it was a contemplation. But I don't think that caused it. I woke up one morning, and I woke up into the awakened state. It was an unusual situation. I haven't heard of many others where it happened like that. So I actually woke up, and I woke up as I woke up.
Wow.
So I woke up into this state.
And then, you say this state. What did it feel like? Like what did the awakened state for you feel like? What was the texture?
It was light. It was pure light streaming through me. In every direction into infinity, and the light had intelligence in it. So it's very difficult to explain that, But so I was light. There was nothing but light.
Well, one thing, I'm so interested in this story, and I promise I won't continue to interrupt. But if people think, oh, light encoded with information, how do you think we get the internet? It's passing light through fiber optic cables, and the light is carrying information. Like, come on. Yeah. Of course light carries information. That's what we do. Look at your fucking phone.
Exactly.
It's light carrying information.
So the light that we see in this world is almost a metaphor for the true light. Right. So we can measure this light and it travels at a certain speed, right? This light, the light of consciousness, it doesn't travel. This was a great insight by Walter Russell, by the way. Light doesn't travel, right? And it's like the true light doesn't travel because it's everywhere simultaneously, it's everywhere, in everything. So it doesn't need to travel. So everything it's holographic. All wisdom is encoded in it. I can't really explain it, but I was in that state. I was thrilled. I was in bliss.
How does your heart feel? Yeah.
I was in bliss. I was like, oh my God, this is it. This is the thing. This is the thing I've been reading about, thinking about. This is it. How has it happened? And I didn't know it was going to stop or end. So I was just in it. And I was like a kid in a candy store. So I had enough of my kind of little thread of egoic consciousness that was there, but it wasn't kind of clinging to anything. It was just a playfulness. So I just went, wow, cool. I can know anything. So I just spent 3 days. I mean, there was a journey I went on in those 3 days and 3 nights. I didn't sleep. There was a physical journey that I took throughout England, where all kinds of things happened and unraveled that all had symbolic memory significance at a deep, deep archetypal level. And I could fill a whole book. Well, in a way, I have encoded it in the Gene Keys book, actually, but not in story form.
So you weren't just writing the whole time. No. You were like living your life and experiencing.
I was moving around. I even went to a wedding in the middle of it, but the wedding became like the royal wedding, the chemical wedding, alchemy. It's like everything. Yeah, everything had some deep symbolic significance. The mysteries were kind of being unraveled to me because I was inside of them. And I could also, I mean, this might sound weird, or I don't know if people can relate to it, maybe not. Anything I wanted to know, I could know. So I was just curious. I was like, okay, who am I? Where do I come from? Where am I going? Can I see the future? Yeah, sure. Almost everything was open. I think there were some places where I wasn't allowed to see, but just for the sake of, I think, keeping some elements of mystery. But I saw at a soul level. So I didn't get like exact details about everything in my life, but I remembered. Memory is a very different feeling from sort of, understanding. Yeah. Memory is like it's filled with knowing. Mm-hmm. It's a deep knowing. So for me, it was remembering, and I mean, it was the way I explain it now is like I was inside the future human, right? Mm. And my whole mission is about preparing the world for the future, for a future human, a new human. And that's why I was given that experience. That's where I came here. That's what my incarnation's about. Even my gene keys reflect that. I have gene key 64. That's my main one. So I have like the whole kind of, I've had to understand every one of them, and kind of map them. And so yeah, it was a very difficult experience, very mythic as well. It had many different kind of layers and levels to it. There was a mythic level, there was a pure divine level where everything was just unraveling in that, like we spoke about earlier, in that perfection of the eternal now. And then there was all these algorithms that I saw of all the mathematics of the cosmos. Mm. And I had no idea what to do with any of that. And I ended up on a Welsh island the third day, on a remote Welsh island, because I had this voice in me that was sort of saying, telling me where to go and what to do. But it wasn't sort of telling me, it was an initiative that I felt, the will of the whole. Anyway, I ended up paying a fisherman to take me out to this remote Welsh island and just leave me there for the day. And so I was sitting on this little island, and I was in the full flood of the final vision, that I had, sitting on this little hilltop called Bardsey Island. It's where Merlin apparently was laid to rest, and lots of legends around it. And I sat on this island, and then this final vision came, and then the experience just fell off me. It just sort of, it gradually just sort of, it was like something just fell back down into the earth, and I was left sitting on this little island. And it was me again. It was Richard, and I joke sometimes like, oh no, not this guy. I know this guy. All his problems and his,
yeah, sure,
yeah. But I then had to deal with that experience, and it took many, many years of like going through process of. I was in denial at one point. I went to complete denial. It didn't happen. You know, I couldn't handle it. I had a Messiah phase, you know, with Messiah complex. I explored that, and I thought, I'm it. You know, I've been given the keys. You know, and that then subsided. It didn't last long actually with me, and all kinds of phases where I didn't know what to do. I couldn't. It took years. And my friends were getting married and doing things and getting jobs, and I was stuck in this space of, well, I don't know what to do. I can't be normal now. I can't go the route I was going to go. I was going to become a wine merchant. That was my family business. I just couldn't do it. So for a long time, I was in that kind of land of waiting and not. And deep uncertainty. And then I met my wife, and we had a kid. And the moment that happened, everything started to sort of come to ground, and I started to write. And then I had a second experience, actually. That was in 2004, another 3 days, but it was very different, and I was much more prepared for it, even though I was more able to handle it. But there was humor in it as well, because I was literally changing nappies and receiving cosmic information.
Perfect.
While living a very ordinary life. And that's been my way. I've led a very ordinary life. And in terms of a family life, and very hands-on. And I'm kind of a normal, slightly geeky guy. You know, I'm sort of into like nature and birds and stuff. And I'm very of the earth actually. But in the gaps of that life have grown up this teaching. You know, because it started to form a teaching. As soon as I had my muse, in a way, I think my wife is possibly my muse, but energetically, you know, I was able to ground it, and I was able to start forming a teaching, and it crystallized, and eventually it became the Gene Keys. It had a name and everything, and it's been growing ever since. But the kind of grace for me is that because I've had those big experiences, and you know, I've also had other ones, smaller, like tremors, that come every now and again. And so that door has always stayed a little bit open for me. Not like the big, wide open door where I was everything. I don't know how you live with that. I mean, I know some people have and do. But for me, I wouldn't have been able to do anything, I don't think. I wouldn't have been able to write, I don't think.
I've had my own more causal experiences because I've been a psychonaut for the last 25 years. So a lot of my experiences have been through the medicine work. But I remember there's two particular experiences that stand out amongst the others. One was after a huge initiation into a particular Bufo lineage, which is 5-MeO-DMT. Yeah. And of course, the experience is wildly expansive, and my body, you know, soul, psyche resonates with that medicine very, very well. It can be a kind of very tumultuous thing, or it can be for me, it's a very conscious and smooth thing. It feels like, home. But it wasn't the experience itself. That is just so overwhelming and so brief, and it offers a lot of insight. But it's not the same thing as during a reactivation that I had after that, where I was just doing some hape, actually, which is just tobacco. And I did some hape, and then I felt like my heart just burst open, burst open. And it was the best feeling I've ever had, but it was also like, oh shit. Like everything is different. Like every aspect of my life is now up for, I am looking at every single thing in my whole life in a different way. And how do I even deal with it? And almost, I remember I was in it, and part of me wanted to stay in it, and part of me was like, no, like close this down. This is far too complicated to reevaluate everything at this point. I got a fucking plan.
Yeah.
You know, and so in a way, I was in the experience of it, but in a way I was like, no, I'm not ready for this yet. Like yet, or maybe I think I still have some fear of that state. It's just like, fuck, what does this mean? What do I got to do now if this state is possible? What does that mean for me, Aubrey? You know, I have a plan for Aubrey.
Yeah.
And it all comes up for negotiation. It happened again in a temple in Egypt when I was in a particular temple and went through this big activation process. It's like, shit. Thank you. Wow, I'm here again. But shit. You know, it's a very interesting thing that happens. And you imagine, like, when you have access to that, it's like, and you think the things that you would care about is like, well, if you had access to the future, why didn't you know which football game, who's going to win the next football match? Why don't you wait, play some?
Funny how you don't think of those things.
You don't give a shit about that. Like, you don't care.
No.
So it's like this idea that it's like, you don't even care to ask.
No.
It doesn't matter.
You're not thinking like that.
Right.
Yeah. For me, it's been about integration. You know, like, I think that the gene keys and my work, and because of how what's happened to me and how I've lived, it's all been about integrating it into an ordinary life. And my journey with very little, you know, psychotropic drugs, just that's not been much on my path. Or I dabbled, but you know, for me, it's been about the integration of those heightened states into an ordinary life. And Gene Keys is that's what it helps us to do, actually. So if you are following those highs and you're tracking them, it's a really good way of like bringing it into an everyday consciousness. So my medicine of choice actually is tea. You know, I've got really into Chinese teas, and at a certain point, because of some friends of mine. And I found that that's a really good daily medicine because it's very heart opening, and it's an ordinary one. It's actually the second most widely drunk fluid in the world, so everyone's doing it, right? After water. So I love those ordinary codings that allow us to step down heightened frequencies so that we can bring them into our everyday lives and really just live with them. I think that's our next stage of evolution, actually, to learn how to do that.
Right.
You know, to bring the spirit into the form, into the flesh, into the world.
Yes.
You know, rather than that escape that's the, you know, what, up and out. You know, it's not the up and out philosophy. You know?
Yeah, it's a dangerous path. And there's, you know, without the grounding, you know, there's been many experiences I've had where, and I pushed the edges, I pushed the boundaries in the, and in the dissolution of the self, it can be very ungrounding, very unstable, and scary sometimes. Well, sometimes it's completely ecstatic, and sometimes absolutely terrifying. And I've had so many experiences where it's like, thank you, body. Thank you so much for like keeping me anchored here, because untethered, just the mind out there in the cosmos, it's a very tricky place to be. And I think you can see a lot of people, especially now with the proliferation of this psychedelic renaissance, there's a cautionary tale there. You know, like, be mindful, like remember to get back in the gym, you know, do your deadlifts, like get your kettlebell swings, like play basketball, you know, like
be ordinary.
Have sex, like you know, eat your food, like feel what it's like to be in the world, because this is what we're here for. It wouldn't exist if we weren't supposed to live through our body.
Exactly. Yeah. No, exactly. I mean, I sometimes also tease people when I hear them say, "This is my last incarnation" or something. And I'm like, really? You want to leave before the party? Like, all this work and all this time, and it's like, you really want, and because it's, in a way, there's a part of us that wants to there's a part of us that wants to get out because it's so painful here. And I sometimes feel like when you do arrive at your final incarnation, you're almost going to be begging to stay.
Yeah,
that's the sign that you're ready. No, it's like, please, just one more. I love it here so much. I'm so anchored. I'm so grounded. the samadhi, I can hold it now. I can contain it. And then the forces say, well, okay, I think you're done then. No, please. That's the sign, like for me, of a very awakened being, someone that really loves being in their body and loves being here on this plane and can play.
So beautiful.
Yeah.
Yeah, because this opens up a whole vector of experience. It's just not available. No matter where you go or how you do it, you're not gonna be able to taste the strawberry. It's not gonna feel the same as making love to your beloved. It's not gonna be the same.
There's always been that saying, hasn't he, that the angels envy us,
For sure.
Yeah.
For sure. And I think there's deep, deep wisdom in that to really celebrate the awe and wonder and magic of this experience without bypassing the pain and the challenge. But if you shift your attitude towards it, you can be, really grateful for all of it,
Exactly.
in the purity of that experience.
Yeah, that's really what it comes down to.
Yeah. So in the format here, one of the things that you do is you talk about your gifts, your highest articulations, the shadows of those articulations. Where did that kind of frame of, the gifts, the shadows, the challenges, the cities, all of that, where did that frame kind of lock in for you?
Well, I was studying a system called human design with the founder. Well, I say I was studying it. I wasn't really studying it. I was doing it. And I I worked with the founder, Ruhu, for many years. And I found the language very tough because it was very monochromatic. And so every part of my soul wanted to expand the language because it was trapping. And so I left that system for lots of reasons. And then I started to innovate the same algorithms, but they slowly became the gene keys. And the first thing that I did is I changed the language so that it had a spectrum. And I'm a lover of trinities and threes. And if you study the gene keys or you come and look at it, you'll find that everything is kind of divided into threes. And because three is this just beautiful universal principle, which is just a perfect way for laying out any massive system. Because it's the fractal number of transcendence. It's constantly, these three layers. So I invented the shadow, this notion of the shadow. And then I looked at, and I came up with the different 64 words for the shadows, and then I knew that those shadows all had gifts in them. So I was like, well, what is like you have the shadow of weakness, right? Right. Which they're difficult words. They're universal words, but like, what is weakness? What does weakness mean? And you really go into it and you go, well, does it mean weak physically? Does it mean weak emotionally? What is it? So you got to dig into these terms and find out what weakness really means. And then what is strength? And like I know you do a lot of work, right? So that can be a thing that it's not in your case, but that can be a thing, for example, where someone feels weak inside unconsciously and they overcompensate, especially men, by building a strong shell, so they make a really strong shell, but underneath there's this deep insecurity of like, I don't know who I am. I don't know. I'm not connected to my true purpose. And so you get to see some of the nuances of what these terms really mean when you could dive deep and you go, well, actually weakness is something where I'm not connected to my source. And it can create all kinds of behaviors. But then when you see it and you start to finally connect with your source and your true purpose, your core purpose, which is in the body, actually, that's where you start to feel strength, inner strength, right? And that inner strength then recreates your life in a different way. So if you can create a life out of unconscious weakness, and it doesn't mean you're weak. It just means that you're only weak in the sense that you're not connected to your source. So you're easy to push around. Yeah,
so let's take this and get, instead of from the meta level, let's get personal. Where's my weakness? All right, so my weakness, if I'm using this, and this is a map, so as I'm working through this, what I'm doing is showing you how you all can pick up the gene keys and like work with this. So, meditating on the weakness. Where does the weakness come from? Well, it's not a sense of lack of potency for me. That's not actually it. The weakness comes from me there's a certain sensitivity and fragility that comes from that sensitivity. I'm so sensitive that I can be so influenced by what other people think,
right?
Or like what emotions, like someone could be having a little bit of contraction around me and it'll feel like devastating.
Right.
So I like, all right, I'm going to become stronger and tougher and be able, and there's virtue in that.
Yeah, of course.
But actually the real gift and something you talk about for my key is tenderness, which is different than weakness, which is like an embrace of the sensitivity. It's like, really some of the toughest, most impressively outward people I know, they actually find that tenderness as well. Like someone like my friend Tim Kennedy, one of the, some people call him the most dangerous man in the world, right? Because he's a UFC top 10 ranked fighter and also Delta Force sniper, and he's just a wild, crazy guy. But you see a tenderness there. Like, when you're around him, you're like, oh yeah. Like he's
and you can see the relationship between those two terms, right?
Yes.
Weakness and tenderness. But one's at a very high level, and one's a shadow in terms of its frequency, right? So this is higher octave frequency of the word, and in a way, it's this true strength is in that tenderness. It's just it's Christ. It's the Christ energy. It's that kind of
so
it's the only thing. Yeah, only thing that can wear down anything. Right, is deep love, deep patience, all those heightened words, compassion. It's the only thing that eventually is left over at the end of a massive struggle. If you know what I mean. That's the victor. The victor is always the most tender one, or the deepest, gentle one, and it's towards yourself, right? So you're having to learn that to be strong and vulnerable at the same time.
Yes,
that's.
Yes. And, and so to bring this into the radical Kabbalah again, Rebbe Gafni talks about the hisaron, which is our unique weakness, or our unique challenge, right? And so all of us, so this is a frame of 64, but within that 64, there's our particular unique expression of this. So my expression, even though I'm 37, doesn't mean I'm going to be like the next 37 I find. No. I'm going to have a unique expression of that archetype.
Exactly.
Uniquely me. So it's a unique hisaron, a unique shadow within a framework. So it fractals all the way down to the unique prism of the individual. And so for me, my weakness and tenderness expresses in my own unique Aubreyness way, from soul to body and all aligned. But it's like the archetypes are still moving, but expresses uniquely underneath that. Yeah. And so this is also something for people like, I don't want to be bound by anything. No. You still get to keep your uniqueness, but just by working through these archetypes, you can understand your own unique hisaron, your own unique challenge, which then leads you to your own unique gift when you actually overcome that.
Yeah, and it's very relational. Like Gene Key 37 is a very relational gene key. So that like part of this strength of that key is in relationships, right? So, and part of its weakness. So, for example, a lot of strong men in the world aren't able to hold down relationships, like to really truly commit. And when you look at, again, you can look at all the keys and you see that they all contain different. There's actually one that's about commitment. There's a gift of commitment, Gene Key 29, and you see how they all kind of dovetail into each other. So, being able to 100% commit to a relationship is what leads to an incredible sense of inner strength, and will take you on a journey eventually leading to these heightened states, whether the relationship stays together or not. It's just the capacity that you maybe have to really get, like you do everything totally, right? And so it's that totality that it has to kind of give itself to everything.
Well, it only works if you do. Yeah. Commitment's a game that only works if you do it. Yeah. Like that. And that's a lesson that I've had to learn as well. It's like anytime I go in with half heart, it doesn't work.
No.
Doesn't work.
Never.
I had to go all the way
There's
totally
leakage.
in.
Yeah.
And that's also one of the challenges that I've had to overcome is being like, let me spread myself to do a little bit of all of these different things. And then all of these little things don't work. And I'm like, God darn it. Like, what am I doing?
Yeah.
I gotta focus and then go all the way in. And when you go all the way in, then the universe, it's almost like the universe is like, there you go, son.
Yeah.
Now this matters to you, so it matters to me.
Totally. It's like digging a well, right? You don't dig like lots of little holes and only go down a little bit.
Yeah, you're not
you got
to
to dig
water.
one big, keep going.
Can't find water with 1,000 1-foot holes.
Exactly.
But 1,000-foot hole, you might get a well.
Yeah,
exactly.
Yeah.
So this other process, and you use the word Siddhi.
Yeah.
What is Siddhi to you? What is that?
Yeah.
Where did that word come from? And
yeah, you have to be careful in America because it sounds a bit like city. Siddhi is spelled Siddhi. It's a Sanskrit word, and it kind of roughly translates as sort of divine gift or superpower. And when the Gene Keys was all sort of coming through, and I was writing it, I got that word. It came in as because there's no other word in English that really does it. So I thought, well, I'm going to use that word. I'm going to borrow that word from Sanskrit. But it was around the time Google had just come on. This was some time ago when I wrote this. So I Googled 64 cities, and I discovered there was a whole tradition out of the Vedas of 64 cities. I was like, wow, isn't that cool? I've plugged directly into this ancient wisdom stream through India. And so those cities are seen in Indian culture as like warnings, because they can actually manifest as we get to heightened states of consciousness if we're doing spiritual practice. So they literally can be powers that occur. In the Gene Keys, they're seen slightly differently. They're broader. So like you would find a city like tenderness or compassion or ecstasy. These are the most refined states that are they're hidden in our DNA, actually. They're waiting to be activated, but they're only activated by these very heightened frequencies. So they're actually hormonal pathways in the brain. They have to open up at certain stages of our consciousness, of our evolution. It's different from states and stages. I kind of say there's states where you can, take a drug or whatever, you get the state, but then there's the stage, which is like over a long, long period of time. If you shift stage, that's a big thing in one's life. That's an initiation that occurs, and you're forever changed if you shift stages. Ken Wilber talks a lot about this kind of stuff in his work, which I've found very interesting.
Yeah, for sure. And this is one of the things that really kind of unlocked for me is the, just looking at my own key in particular, because that's a way in, right? And I think I'm excited to actually really now, having met you and feeling the truth and resonance of this, not only through my own key, but then to actually explore this in general. But, so the Siddhi is my essence.
Yes.
And it's like my essence. And then I couldn't describe something better than that. What is my divine gift? It's my Aubrey-ness. It's like when I'm the most Aubrey, like it's so magical.
Yeah.
It's so magnetic. It's to the world. It's magnetic to myself. It feels the best. It's like, and then when I'm in, what Paul Selig would call my small self, or my identity structure, or my wounding, or my own, or my own complexities, and I'm retracted from my essence. Lots of things are troubling, uncomfortable, disappointing, things aren't working right. But when I can step into that, and then so much of this other work is like, all right, so how do you get to your essence? Well, it's about your vitality and not being exhausted. And I like feel all of this. And so it gives like a clear path of like, okay, it's like a confirmation of these things that I've known. But if I really devote to this and almost become religious, about how I devote to actually being able to offer this superpower to the world, and then and I got an idea of something that's confirmed by these kind of cosmic principles. but it's a super helpful reminder.
Yeah. And it always begins with a shadow. So there's deep shadow work here in the Gene Keys. It doesn't bypass. In fact, it begins there. So you've got to dig in with you. You've got to be really honest with yourself when you look at these words. Because some of the words are pretty heavy. Like weakness is not nice. I mean, none of them are nice. Corruption is one of them. And you've got to work out. Well, I'm not corrupt. But then you've got to really go in and go, well, where do you corrupt your life? How do you get caught in patterns where things are sort of breaking apart and dividing because of your attitude, because of the way you're thinking about people or things? Maybe you are more corrupt than you think. Maybe your mind is corrupting data, and that's causing these victim patterns. And so every shadow, in a way, that you look at in Gene Keys is a victim tendency that we spin around in. And so the whole system then becomes a process of awareness, self-awareness. You look at that shadow, you start with courageously looking at it, and you go, well, where does it show up? And I wrote a lot of I wrote a lot of text, a big Gene Keys book. I've recorded hundreds of audios, like just to give people more kind of triggers into what does that word mean? How can I look at that word of my shadow in different ways, and how can I contemplate it at work in my life? And then you start to see it, and you start to see it operating around you, and that's when you have the potential for a breakthrough.
And I would venture to say that you could look at all 64 keys and spend time contemplating.
Yeah.
Not like, oh no, this is 46. It's not me.
Yeah.
No. No. It's you got it. Whatever that weakness is,
exactly.
whatever that shadow is.
Yeah.
You got it.
Yeah.
It's in there.
Overseriousness, by the way.
Yeah. It's in there.
Everyone will have that.
Yeah.
Like we all get too serious at times, So you can look at every shadow and you get to see, well, what's underneath that? Delight. Like the gift of delight is hidden in seriousness. Isn't that wild? So the moment you find yourself hooked into overseriousness and you're like, oh my God, there I go. Suddenly you're in delight.
Right.
Suddenly you're like, oh my God, I don't know how I forgot. And it's not a kind of mental thing. It's actually a physical experience. Working with the Gene Keys is very physical. It's very embodied. It's an embodied teaching. I was a body worker for 10 years before I even got into this, So I'm only interested in it if it can get into the body, into the cells of the body, and help us from there. Yeah.
Right. You've done some other work surrounding the Gene Keys, and we were just in a conversation with my dear sister Caitlin, and she was talking about the 7 seals.
Yes.
Right. So it's not just the Gene Keys that you've done. You've really kind of expanded this understanding that come partly from your, Satori, this moment of enlightenment, but also just from your study of, all of these traditions and different things. Tell us about some of these other different projects that people might not be that aware of.
Yeah, no, they might. If they go to the Gene Keys website, they'll start to see them. But you dig in deep. There's a lot in there. It's under the surface. It's 20 years or 25 years of transmissions that I've been kind of sharing. And 7 Seals, as an example, is is one of the transmissions. It doesn't require any profiles or anything like that. It's quite, I was quite surprised when it came through. It does have a deep resonance with those angelic traditions from these heightened states of consciousness. So people working with the 7 Seals are really calling in higher forces, and so in it would show how the 7 bodhisattvas from Buddhism relate to the 7 saints of Christianity, and they come together in the Archangels, the 7 Archangels. So we're looking at like different pantheons that kind of map these heightened codes. You could say the ascended masters and those kind of things. But what they really are is heightened aspects of our own consciousness. So no matter what name you give it or what lineage you go down, you're invoking it. So those 7 seals are invocations where you call in those powers on a daily basis. It's a very theatrical kind of poetic invocations that I wrote at that time and recorded with amazing music. And there's all kinds of layers, and they relate to the 7 stars, and they relate to, all these different, it's the hologram of the cosmos, but encoded through those seven rays. They're there in all traditions.
Yeah,
the seven chakras,
seven tones
seven tones, seven colors. And so it's very, they're powerful poetic invocations that have a deep resonance for certain people. And when you do those practices, you, over a period of time, you feel those energies coming into your life. I mean, I first launched it on Cortes Island, which is in BC, British Columbia. And we did 4 days, the first time I'd done them. And it's a departure for me. I was like, really? I'm going to stand in a room of 150 people and recite these invocations with this powerful music. And I felt like a kind of weird priest. And it was very un-English. This is part of me that's a bit shy. And I'm like, well, I don't know how I found myself doing this. And there's like people lying on the ground all around me, and I'm standing sort of resonating these powerful invocations. But at the end of 4 days, the very last morning, the Archangel came. I mean, I don't know how else. Safkiel, right? The seventh, which is the feminine, the great feminine Archangel. And you could feel the presence come into the room, and you could feel it. And everyone I was in tears. I was like, I didn't know what to do. I was like, I didn't know it was going to work. Because I just like brought it in, and there it was. I was like, wow, this so anyway, it works, but you got to do it.
Right.
I mean, we did some deep shadow work as well to kind of get there. So it wasn't like a bypass thing. We really went deep into the sort of theater of how do you call an angelic being into your, you need to be ready for that kind of thing.
I would love for you, if you're up for it, to go through the 7 archangels and just give a little bit of the flavor, because it sounds like you've had, real direct contact. And I've had some contact through my medicine journeys, but not with the pantheon, just occasional oh, okay.
Well, it was like, I maybe won't go through them all, but I'll give you some examples, right?
Okay.
And what's key is, when I had that experience of light, and I talk about light, right? I experienced light at a much higher level, and I kind of experienced how a higher being experiences light. So if you take, so I came up with these words in the 7 seals for the different kinds of light. So Safkiel, which is the 7th, is the great feminine archangel presence. And I use the word luminescence, right? And I describe them in the book. There's a book around it. I describe that color is an angelic color, right? So it doesn't just have color; it has a feeling, it has archetype to it. It's a deep indigo blue, like before the sky fades to the stars, but it also has gold strips flecked through it. There's this incredible gold flecked through it. So it's this combination of deep indigo and gold, and then it has a sense as well. So I describe like a story around it so that people can get that, and then it has a smell, and it has a tone and a sound, and all of that is the light. The light has all those qualities. So at the highest level of consciousness, an angelic light has all those elements wound into it. Do you see what I mean? So it's not just like visual; it's a whole massive experience. So in the 7 seals, I do my best to kind of conjure up those frequencies so that people can enter into them. And it relates to a star, like that relates to the star Sirius, particularly that one. And it relates to the Mother Mary, and it relates to the Tara lineage in Tibetan Buddhism. So there's these different streams that you pull them all down into this one experience of the frequency until you're so like lit up with the frequency. In your imagination and your intuition, through your body, through, there are mudras that go with them as well. So you're actually kind of forming the ancient sigil shapes, and there are sounds as well. And so what you're doing is you're imbuing that higher frequency through the fullness of your being, and then it moves through you. And there are 7 of them, so you can do them in Latin. They're each very, very different as well. They have different qualities. You come to the third one, it's iridescence. It's completely different. It's
And which archangel is this?
I think, if I'm right, it's Haniel. I think that's right. Someone might correct me if I'm wrong. But it's very, it's multicolored. It's rainbow. It's iridescent. You know, when you look at an oil slick or something and you see that iridescence, or the dragonfly's wing, or you see that sometimes, you see little kind of bites of angelic colors in nature. You know, you might see it in the wing of a bird of paradise or something. And, or you might hear it in a certain symphony of music or something you're listening to, and it's just there, it's caught. So and it might be a certain geometry as well. So it's about decoding these heightened kind of frequencies and then bringing them into the body and into the being, and connecting them to the star system, to the star fields as well. So it's a really wild transmission, the Seven Seals.
I think that's so beautiful, because I've always really deeply felt that everybody's like, I connected with the Pleiadians. And like, okay, but if you were in a Christian context, it wouldn't be the Pleiadians, it'd be an archangel. And if you're in the Buddhist context, it wouldn't be star beings, it would be one of the emanations from that lineage.
Exactly.
If you're in the Hindu tradition, it'd be one of the emanations from that tradition. We're all talking about the same thing.
Same thing.
You know, it's these same archetypal energies that we give different names to, which then actually allows you to realize, like, any true download of wisdom in all of these traditions has its own unique beauty and story. But the synthesis of them can then be wildly, like, exciting. Like, I'm in this moment, like, I can't wait to immediately order the Seven Seals book and, like, get in and dive in and experience it. And then also feel it for myself. You know, maybe your understanding of the smell of, Safriel, you said?
Yeah, Safkiel. Yeah.
Safkiel.
Could be different.
Maybe it could be different. For me, it might be like, you're saying lotus. I'm really feeling night blooming jasmine for her.
Frankincense or something.
Yeah, exactly. Like, and then just to really feel like, and then, and I think this is the beauty of it. It's a living thing. And I don't feel from you this idea like, oh, no. What are you talking about, Aubrey? Like, it's lotus. And I'm like, you'd be like, oh no, interesting. Like, I love how if I was really tapping, and not just from my mind trying to be contrarian and try and say, oh no, I'm gonna.
No, totally.
But if I really feel it, and then it opens up a conversation, and then it can maybe like, and everybody who does that has that opportunity.
Absolutely, yeah. It can't, it's such an inexact science. And I created another system called the Dream Arc, for example, where I translated all the gene keys, the shadows, the gifts, and the siddhis, into animals. So the shadows.
Cool.
So the animals, the shadows all became underworld creatures. The gifts all became mammals, and the birds were siddhis. Right.
All right. Tell me a little more.
Right. So it then gives you. It's interesting because it gives you a right brain route into the same matrix. You don't need any profiling systems. You just, whatever animal you dream of, or that comes and visits you. Like yesterday, I saw a roadrunner, right? So I'm like, I've never seen a roadrunner before because I haven't been to this area. And so I haven't looked, I need to go and look that up in the codex, because I wrote this big codex of all the creatures. Right? And I think it's the gene key 46, which is about the ecstatic. So every bird brings a kind of vision of some kind of ecstatic or some kind of energy, a vision, right? And then every mammal brings a gift, and then every underworld creature brings a fear. It's a fear key.
What is an underworld creature?
Well, it can be an insect, a reptile, an amphibian, a fish.
Okay.
Those are the kind of, they live at their brain frequencies operate at a slower wave pattern than mammals, and then birds again. And also, this is a threefold shamanic, the upper world, middle world, lower world. Unconscious, conscious, superconscious. So it's a fun, it's fun, but it's very profound way into the gene keys that many people have been enjoying. It's more playful. It's completely of the right brain. So no need of the profile. If for me, if the roadrunner shows up, it's a sign like, okay, well, that's gene key 46. I'm going to contemplate that. I'm going to see why that's come at this time in my life, and what meaning it might have. Like, and what's underneath that? What's the fear?
It's so much cooler than just Googling, like, I saw a fox, let me go to Google and figure this out. But like, if fox has a correlation to a gene key, and then you can actually say, okay, here's some deeper wisdom that I can go through besides what I look up on some, new age Google search result.
It takes you down a fractal, wormhole.
Yeah.
Where there's a lot of information encoded. Yeah. So
have you thought about making a oracle card deck with these different?
We've made one.
Yeah.
Cool. It hasn't quite, we're just polishing it now. It'll be coming out next year.
And is it going to have the animals or?
It has 192 cards in 3 tens, of the 3 levels. And you can use it in lots of different ways. We create a whole online program called the Dream Arc, where you can move. It's the online program that gets you offline, right? So you're listening to your dreams, you're listening to your unconscious, you're seeing what creatures come in when. You're not overanalyzing it, but you're really listening. Like, well, I've always really related to an owl, let's say, and I want to use that as a symbol on my logo card or whatever. And then you get to look and you say, well, what does the owl represent? Not, at a kind of deep archetypal level, right? And follow that down. And also that there'll be a fear under that as well, because there'll be a fear key. So there'll be an underworld creature that's connected that you may never think of when you think of an owl, so you're going to get to see these different layers of resonance. So the owl, its resonance on the mammal plane would be the whale. You can maybe feel that, right? They're both kind of beings, they're similar, like wisdom stream. I'm trying to remember the unconscious, the underworld. I can't quite remember it. But so it's giving you a kind of a map, a creature map, a shamanic map, if you like, of the inner world that uses the gene keys, but in a completely different way. So I wrote another whole book, a codex, where it was sort of fun for me. So I finished it. It's not published yet. It's coming out with the deck. But I wasn't expecting to talk about this, but it is. I can see that you kind of enjoy the resonance of the right brain field. I
enjoy all of it.
Yeah.
I mean, this is the thing, I mean, sometimes I'm able to absorb the full corpus of a guest's work before they arrive. Right. And sometimes I've just gotten in enough to be excited and I allow my curiosity to guide the conversation. And this is one of those things. Yeah. But I can genuinely say I'm in this conversation now and I've seldom been so eager to leave the conversation and go look at the work that we're talking about here, because it's like, fuck yeah.
Do you have a creature that's sort of live for you right now? Or that you're
on my arm here, I have a raven, and the raven is very very important for me. A tiger is very important for me. Dragon is very important for me. Obviously, that's a mythical creature. It's not an actual physical creature.
So raven in the Gene Keys pantheon would relate to Gene Key 47, which is the vision of transfiguration. Right, and so if you go deep into that key, it's all about karma. It's about transforming the oppressive karma of an ancestral lineage, and it's a real. There's a lot of depth. There's a lot of contemplation in the raven, and it's why it's been kind of held up as this mythical creature by different indigenous cultures, and it's also a trickster. So it has that whole.
Got that. I like that part.
So it has that.
I like that part.
And in the Dream Arc, we have 12 categories, right? And we placed the creatures loosely in those categories. So we have tricksters, and we have unifiers, and we have dreamers, and we have warriors, and those kind of things. There's 12 of them. Hunters. And so if you're tuning into a hunter, there's a.
Is the tiger a hunter? Is the tiger up here?
Sure.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, for sure. But it's that energy of, and it's funny in the Dream Arc as well, because when you read the creatures, because I wrote them in the first person, I am tiger, and I just allowed my stream of consciousness to come through. And the tiger's a funny one, because when you read the tiger, and the tiger says, if you want to work with me, you can only work with me for the minimum of a year, and you can't work with any other creatures. And you have no idea how many emails we had from people complaining about that. Like, I want to work with the tiger, but I want to work with other creatures. And the tiger's like really insistent. Like, it's an energy that you want to work with that. If you really want to work with that, you got to drop everything else.
Well, I would take my pants off and show you the tiger I have tattooed on my thigh, but I don't think it's appropriate for the podcast. But
so anyway,
this gives me, there's certain ones, and then the dolphin. There's like certain other ones that have been like really resonant in my life, and so that's again an entry point.
Exactly,
it's a way that like your own desire can enter in, and I just wrote. What's interesting is I just wrote a poetry book, and you talk about these sevens and these threes, and I wrote a poetry book called Love to the Seventh Power, and I basically took the Greek understanding of the many different types of love. And in the Greek pantheon, there's a lexicon, I should say. There's 8 different types of love, depending on how you cut it up. But for me, what I really felt was actually there's 7, and the 8th is kind of like a partial. I don't know if it exactly qualifies, but then I connected it to the rays of light in a rainbow, and I connected it to the tones of music, and it's like there's 7. There are 7 types of love.
And, love that.
Eros and mania and philia, philautia, storge, agape. All of the different types of types of love. And pragma is the 7th. And then I'll put realize that all of my poetry comes from that love. Like all poetry comes from love. Like it comes from, which is capital L love, like the expression of the light, love, light. These are synonyms of different ways of expressing, but they have different feeling tones, but they're the same thing. And so all poetry comes from love, and divided it into these different things. And the tiger appears in one. It's a short one, so I actually remember it, but it's, slurking, it's a haiku, slurking black tiger, he desires what he devours, smoke and burning rose. And it was like, it just kind of came through, and I was like, there's something about the tiger's way in which it blends in, and it's this kind of supreme hunter, and the hunger. Emperor. The hunger, he desires what he devours. Not he devours what he desires, he desires what he devours. It's this like whole erotic kind of experience of the tiger. So this leads me then, all right, so tigers come through. It's come through in medicine journeys, come through, and like this is, but I didn't have anywhere to go to work with it. I tattooed it on my body, and I wrote a poem about it, and then that's a wrap.
There it is.
But now I have like a pathway. Well, you can go. You can go in deeper.
You could explore Jinki 18, which is the gift of integrity, which would relate to the tiger. It's about integrity. If you think about it, the tiger holds the integrity, even in the way it moves and even in the way it sits when it's still. Like the tiger is like, and the way it looks at you. It's holding you to a path of integrity, right? So it's that part inside us that has to hold ourselves to that level of integrity. So it's a really deep contemplation, that one. You're like, shit, okay, where am I not being, where am I not that? That's why I think in the book it says, you need to work with only me for a year, because this is a pretty intense piece of work we're going to do together. This is not something to just pick up like a, oh yeah, I got the tiger, isn't that fun? Tomorrow I'll get the weasel or whatever. It's like this is the dream arc invites intense work. It's not a light kind of.
And again,
nice
it's
oracle.
about digging that hole 1,000 feet deep instead of digging 1,000 1-foot holes. How
so fun.
How cool. I mean, this is like. And I see now where I was getting that initial impression from people who've actually done deeper dives with your work than I have, admittedly. And I've done a lot of deep dives in a lot of sacred, traditions. But this feels like it has the gravitas of a new kind of modern tradition that synthesizes the old, but then transforms and transfigures it into something that relates to our context in a really cool way.
Some of them, The deepest work, I think, if I can mention it, is called the Venus sequence, because it was the second mystic experience I had. It was in 2004, another 3 days, and in those 3 days, I received the kind of algorithms of suffering. That's a way I could do it. Like these are the codes of why we suffer, the trauma codes. And so I laid them out, and then I had to kind of go through them myself, which was horrible. And they really show up in our relationships. And so I had to do a lot of deep relational work at the time. And it's not comfortable, but as in the gene keys, every shadow that you look at has a gift. So you know that even in these very difficult places are lying, like there's a purpose. So when you look back on the litter of your relationships, in life, and you get to see why is it so hard? You get to see precisely what is your trauma encoded, and it's quite, it comes down to only 6 lines. In gene keys, they're called the lines. So you have 64 keys, but then you have 6 lines in every key. So you'll see in your 37, we'll have a certain one of those 6 lines. And it's a coloring to the key. So when you go into the Venus sequence, which is a stepping into our deep trauma patterns and how they're wired in us through the 7-year cycles of our childhood, 3 7-year cycles. So from 0 to 8, and then 8 to 14, then 14 to 21. Those are 3 different wounding patterns. And so when we go through the Venus work, we're actually unpeeling layers of our wounding. It's heavy stuff. I always advise people to do it with a friend or with someone or with a therapist. Loads of therapists use it now because things come up, because they're not just ideas in the head, they're actually in the body, they're memories in the body. And so you get to see, well, what is the archetypal wounding that I had? And you get right to the core wound. So everyone has a core wound, which is so you came in with that point, 6:30 in the morning, where it was, there's a very specific core wounding at that moment. And that core wounding is related to your ancestry. And it's something you've agreed to take on. And so you have to understand, well, what is that shadow? And which of the 6 manifestations does it have? So line 1 is repression. Is it a wound that has been repressed? Or is it line 2, denial? Is it a wound that is coated in denial? So that would make it very hard for you to see it. Is it a wound of shame? Is it a wound that you're trying to run from? Is it a wound of rejection? Is it something that happened where you were just an outcast in some way? Is it a wound? That's the 4. 5. Is it guilt? And guilt is something that's a transpersonal wound. Is it a baggage that you feel has been laid on your shoulder and you can't get rid of it, and it's connected to other people in your life and they're holding you in it as well, your expectations, all of that? Or is it line 6, which is the wound of isolation? Is it a wound where you have isolated yourself in some way? And you get to see one of those is going to be specific to each one. I'm line 1. I'm the repressed one. So, good for me. I came into an English culture, went to an English boarding school, had classic repressive educational journey, repressed all my feelings, had to then go on a whole journey to rediscover them, bring them up, and find integration. It's a journey I'm still on.
And so these 6 lines are just things that you felt. You felt them, or did you kind of transcode them from different other traditions?
I mean, I felt them, but they're archetypal. They're there in all cultures. They go across cultures. They go across gene pools. They're so fundamental. And in that book, the Venus book, which I wrote, you can trace them back further. So each of those 6 lines then becomes a racial wound as well, and they actually hold entire races in wound patterns. So an example might be a 3rd line wound, which is the one about shame. At a collective level, that's the wound of panic, right? And migration. And it lives with the 6th line wound. They kind of work in pairs. So the 6th line wound at a collective level is annihilation, right? So you have annihilation and at one end, and then the other end, the victim end, you have migration and panic. So you get to see one whole race that wants to annihilate another race. I'm not going to say who they are because we all know, right? There's one whole race in their DNA wants to get rid of another race, and the other race has to keep moving and migrating and panicking. And it's a patterning that's coded across races, entire gene pools. There are other ones. That's just one as an example.
Sure.
Perhaps the most intense one in a way, because the 6th line, it's that isolation. And so at a racial level, that's why it becomes indifference. That's why that whole race, let's say, the Nazis, for example, can become indifferent. There's that energy of indifference. They're just animals, and that enables that wound to live out its annihilation kind of theater. It's pretty intense. And then the third line, which is the one at the other end, is the victim of that. And so it's about but they live on. So what I discovered in the Venus sequence is that these individual wounding patterns are also transpersonal, and they're also racial, and they're also global, right? So actually, even, as you probably, like me, a lover of mythology, I followed them right into our myths, and I realized they were encoded there as well. Like the very first, earliest myths or creation stories are murder and revenge. That's a line 1 and a line 4. And you get to see, oh wow, they're even in our myths. It's the same coding, but it's part of the way we think. It's our psyche. It's bound into our structure of our civilizations, into our archetypes. So you get to, but the beauty of this is you get to see what heals each wound. What is the energy that heals each wound? And that's really powerful. So you get to see like how an individual healing their own trauma actually creates a ripple through the ancestral, and diffuses a large amount of the ancestral wounding of its culture. So it's really powerful. It means that Venus work, which is the toughest work in a way, because it's deep shadow stuff that we do in our relationships mostly, actually it has a fractal kind of ripple out into our gene pool. Mm-hmm. So if enough people do this kind of work, and there are people doing it in other ways, they don't need necessarily these wound maps, but like the movement right now that's come in of people really working with trauma, because of some really great teachers that are around teaching that work is actually healing the planet at levels that we cannot compute.
Yeah,
because the transpersonal is connected to the personal.
And I'm sure, as with the gene keys, these trauma patterns also point to a great gift.
They do.
So if the Aryan, if just to use that since you referenced it, and I think there's many cultures that have tried to wipe out other cultures. I don't think it's exclusive to one, but
no, it isn't.
But so let's just use that Aryan mentality that came through the Nazism, and which is that this idea of supremacy and all of that. I imagine if you heal that, there'll be the potential for this great inclusiveness.
Totally.
That'll be on the other side as you become aware of this desire for your own separate self-supremacy, then you can actually
it's the opposite.
Step into the opposite.
The gift is the opposite. You're exactly right. It is inclusiveness. In that 6th line, its gift is inclusiveness. It's like, how do we include everyone in this world?
Yeah, no one left out. No one left behind.
Exactly. And the 3rd line, which is the other end, is instead of running and trying to escape its shame, in a way, is celebration. That 3rd line that's its joy. It's like, let's just stay and celebrate. Mm-hmm. All our differences. Let's celebrate our differences, our diversity. So they're kind of, you can see that our healing is actually built into the structure of humanity. So you can see that we're going to get there.
Yeah.
Because it's coded in.
Yeah, it's just about how bumpy the road is going to be, and that's depending on the choices we make, the diligence we apply to our own work and our own challenges and the collective challenges, and how rough do we want to make this world? Like, this is the question. Yeah, how far into separation do we want to go before we find our own kind of shared
home.
One home, one voice, one heart, which is I think our destiny.
It's I think it's a nice place to probably bring it to a close, isn't it? Like that's always been the message in the Gene Keys, and it's the message of the epiphany experiences I've had, which I stood inside that future human, and I saw where we were going. I didn't just see it; I felt it. I knew it. I was like, oh, thank God. It was just like, this is where we're going. And I knew it, and I've known it ever since. And so I stand for that. Like, that's what the Gene Key stands for. It's like we are loaded with these siddhis, with these superpowers. They're actually dormant in our DNA. And as you said, through whatever process, however long it takes, probably a big meta crisis, to awaken it, so that a lot of the old systems have to fall away. They have to. And the old structures that we formed that were based on that old fear paradigm, they've got to fall away in order that the new forms can come up underneath. And that's...
And for us to focus our gaze, one beautiful way to express hope is a memory of a memory of the future.
So true.
So have that memory of the future human, of the future
really
world,
important.
and just hold that steady no matter what happens, because in the holding of that gaze, it opens up that possibility.
Exactly. And it gives us, more than hope in a way. It's like, it shows us the higher purpose of crisis.
Right.
Doesn't it? And wounding and trauma.
So cool. I'm so excited to dive deep, and when I do, I hope we get to have another conversation, because I'm going to be loaded with the specifics of things that I've explored on this path.
Great. Well, I'll send you all the stuff as well. So
beautiful.
You've got it all.
Beautiful. Thank you so much. Well, it's been such a great experience to meet you, and
likewise.
And obviously, when somebody's hyped up like you are, I always temper my own expectations. Like, all right, I don't want to get too excited about this, but in this case, all the hype is real. The hype is real, everybody.
Well, thank you.
So thank you so much. It's been an absolute pleasure.
Yeah, real pleasure. Thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you so much, everybody. We love you, and we'll see you next week. Thanks for tuning into this video. Make sure you hit subscribe. Follow me at Aubrey Marcus. Check out the Aubrey Marcus podcast, available everywhere. And leave a comment. Let me know if this video resonated or what else you would like to hear from me in the future. Thank you so much.